Well, good morning. Questions. Do you ever have questions about religion or theology or anything like that that maybe you didn't want to ask because you thought maybe you were the only one in the room that didn't have the answer and you didn't want to feel silly, or maybe there wasn't an opportunity to ask it? Well, the pastors got together with a new sermon series, Pastor, I Have a Question. And the last month, we have been collecting questions from you, and we put together a sermon series. So last week, we talked about prayer. This week, we are talking about evil and suffering. So let me read to you from our write-up about the sermon. If God is all-powerful and there is suffering in the world, then God must not be good. If God is all good and there is suffering in the world, then he must not be all-powerful. Since there is suffering and evil in the world, is God not good, or is God not all-powerful? Because it cannot be both. All I have to say is, wow, do you guys know it's summer? I should be getting the easy sermons for summer. Well, let's dive into this because we have a lot to talk about. Let's first talk about suffering and the root of the suffering. And there's several different kinds of suffering, and so let's talk about it. The first one I want to bring up to you is what I call the middle school cell phone suffering. Now, if you know middle schoolers, they really have two emotional states. It's either looking at you with this bored face that doesn't change except for eye rolls, or it's completely dramatic and full of emotion. Well, usually a few times a year, middle schoolers come to me and they are about to die. They are in such pain, such suffering, and the root cause is their parents don't let them have a cell phone. Or their parents don't let them stay up as late as their friends. Or their mom won't let them date that cute boy in math class. That is the root of their suffering. Now, I may be making light of this, but this is feelings that they are going through. This is the emotions that they feel. They feel like they are left out of the crowd. They feel like all the other kids in the class get to have these things, and they don't. And what is at the heart of their suffering is envy, jealousy, greed. So that is one kind of suffering, middle school cell phone suffering. The next kind of suffering I want to talk about is suffering that we bring about on ourselves. This is suffering that, when it comes down to the heart of it, we have caused. And there's many examples of this, but I want to talk to you about Benjamin. Benjamin was a middle-class suburban guy who had a good job. He had a wife and 3 kids and was living the life. Then life got difficult, and he started cutting corners on his job. He started working with the wrong kind of people. And because of this corner cutting that he took at work, his life started to fall apart. He lost it all because of the decisions that he made. And that happens time and time again. We have suffering because what we have done to ourselves. But think about Benjamin's family. The family had to move to a smaller house. The kids lost their college fund. And it is no action of their own, it was the action of their father. That gets us to the third kind of suffering. Suffering that we didn't cause. suffering that comes out of nowhere. It's that cancer that hits your family like a ton of bricks. It's that fire that destroys a whole house for no reason at all. And we ask, why? Why did cancer have to take Kelly at such a young age? Why did a tornado hit the Miller's house but leave all the neighbors' houses just fine? Why, when the Davidson family went on a Sunday afternoon car ride, did that bridge collapse, causing them pain and suffering? In the midst of all that, we ask why, and where is God in all this suffering? September 11th, 2001. I will never forget that day, and probably most of you won't either. I was a young stay-at-home mom at the time, and Ashton was just a toddler. Each morning we would sit down on the sofa, I would turn on PBS and watch Sesame Street. Well, for some reason, I don't know why, instead of turning on PBS, I turned on the news station. And there I saw where the first plane hit a tower. And at that time, we didn't know what was going on. We thought it was a pure accident. But then shortly after that, the second plane hit. And we knew it wasn't an accident. Our country was under attack. Fear set in. There's pain and suffering. And I have plenty of pictures in my head from that day. But there's one that sticks out to me. As people are running from the building, the first responders are running towards the towers. They're running towards that suffering, running towards that pain. It is in that moment that we see these courageous people running towards that suffering. And that is what God does in our pain and suffering. God runs towards us. God loves us so much that God sent his Son to die for us. Now, Jesus could have come into this world and taken over politically. He could have taken over our lives, directed us anywhere to go, directed us out of the pain and suffering. But instead, Jesus, our God, chose suffering, chose the cross. He chose to run towards that pain. And Jesus did this so that in our pain and suffering, he could be there for us and walk with us through it. Jesus comes to us in that pain, in that suffering, in the frustration, in the anguish, and brings us hope. From Romans, it says, I consider that our present suffering are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subject to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in pain of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inward as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. In this Roman text, we hear about the present suffering. And it talks about hope that comes through God, hope that comes through Jesus, that one day all this suffering will be swept away and will be replaced with joy and praise. And until that time, God will be with us. So we have hope for this future time. It's great that one day all this suffering will be gone. In the future, Jesus will come back and completely restore the world. And the future sounds wonderful. And we see a picture of this in our Revelation text. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, and for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eye. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." A new heaven and a new earth. Jesus on his throne, and there will be no more death. No more mourning. No more pain. No more crying, and every tear will be wiped away. And it will be amazing. And that is our hope for the future. That is our hope that we have in Jesus Christ. But what about today? What about our pain and suffering now? What about today? Brings us to our gospel for today. From John chapter 16. "Do you now believe?" Jesus replied. "A time is coming, and in fact has come, when you will be scattered, each to your own home. You will leave me all alone, yet I am not alone, for my Father is with me. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." What's interesting about this is Jesus doesn't sugarcoat it. Jesus said, didn't say, "If you believe in me, life will be easy." Jesus tells us the truth. You will have trouble. You will have pain. You will have suffering. But I have conquered the world. Notice he didn't say, "I will conquer the world." He said, "I have conquered the world." And Jesus has conquered the world through the cross. And because of that, he shows up in our pain and suffering. He is running towards us when we hurt, when we're in anguish. The hardest part about suffering is feeling like you're all alone, feeling like there's no one there. Have you heard stories of those that have passed away, and it's so sad to think that they died alone, maybe in a hospital room or at home by themselves? There's nothing worse. But Jesus is there in the suffering, in those times of sorrow. I want to share a story with you. It's written by Catherine Wallace, and it's based on the Winnie the Pooh characters. It occurred to Pooh and Piglet that they hadn't heard from Eeyore for several days. So they put on their hat and coat and trotted across the 100-acre woods to Eeyore's stick house. Inside the house was Eeyore. "Hello, Eeyore," said Pooh. "Hello, Pooh. Hello, Piglet," said Eeyore in a grum-sounding voice. "I just thought we would check in on you," said Piglet, "because we hadn't heard from you, and so we wanted to know if you were okay." Eeyore was silent for a moment. "Am I okay?" he asked eventually. "Well, I don't know, to be honest. Are any of us really okay? That's what I ask myself. All I can tell you, Pooh and Piglet, is that right now I feel really rather sad and alone and not much fun to be around at all, which is why I haven't bothered you, because you wouldn't want to waste your time hanging out with someone who is sad and alone and not much fun to be around at all, would you now?" Pooh looked at Piglet, and Piglet looked at Pooh, and they both sat down, one on either side of Eeyore in his stick house. Eeyore looked at them in surprise. "What are you doing?" "We're sitting here with you," said Pooh, "because we are your friends. And true friends don't care if someone is feeling sad or alone or not much fun to be around at all. True friends are there for you anyway. And so here we are." "Oh," said Eeyore. "Oh." And the three of them sat there in silence, and while Pooh and Piglet said nothing at all, somehow, almost imperceptibly, Eeyore started to feel a very tiny little bit better because Pooh and Piglet were there. No more, no less. And that is how Christ shows up in our pain and in our suffering. Jesus works through us. You know those times in your life when you think of somebody you haven't thought of in years and you reach out? That's Jesus working inside of us. When we run into an old friend at the grocery store and you just spill everything that's been happening in your lives, that's Christ showing up in our lives. When you're feeling alone and someone shows up on your front step, that's Jesus in our midst. And that's what we're called to do, to show Christ's light to others in their darkest hour. We are called to run to those that are hurting, knowing that we might not have the words or the knowledge of what to do, but know we have ourselves. And when our friends are hurting, when our loved ones are struggling, when our community is suffering, we can show up. And that is how Jesus is being there, by just being present. And if you are struggling, if you're alone, if you are hurting, I want you to hear, you are not alone. Will you pray with me? God of hope, where there is suffering, bring your relief. Where there is hurt and heartache, bring your peace. Where there is pain, bring your presence. God, use us to be your presence in this world. Give us the strength to run towards our friends and family members that are hurting and in pain. And Lord, help us to shine your light in the darkest corners of this life. Amen.